Jim Collins is no stranger to the spotlight. On at least 2 occasions, his intelligence and hard work landed him on the global stage. During watershed moments in history, the steady hand of this former U.S. ambassador to the Russian Federation helped guide our nation's foreign policy through perilous waters and uncertain times.
I was in charge of the embassy at the end of 1991 when President Gorbachev held down the flag and ended the Soviet Union. And I was in charge of the embassy for a good part of 1992. And they were pretty dramatic moments.
But before he took his place on the world stage, Jim was a bright student and a cellist at his Illinois high school. There he met a music teacher that introduced him to a Russian opera that sparked a flame that still burns to this day.
I kind of got hooked by the music, the story. I started to look for a way to learn something about the Russian language. Now, in North Shore, Chicago, in the mid-1950s, nobody was teaching Russian.
As a young man, Jim found a Russian Orthodox minister who would teach him the language. Years later, while he was studying Russian history at Harvard, Sputnik was launched into space, and suddenly the Soviet Union had everyone's attention.
The idea I had was basically to pursue the Russian bug. So I joined the history faculty at Indiana to pursue a PhD, and I was also then a student in what at that time was a complementary program that you were part of at the Russian and East European Institute that was led by Professor Burns.
He and Robert Gates, the former Secretary of Defense, were both students under Robert Burns, and both got master's degrees here at Indiana University before going on to really distinguished careers in diplomacy and public service. And his knowledge of culture, the language, his comfort level in being in Russia, all of which began during his time at IU.
IU opened many doors for the future ambassador, but foremost among them might have been the opportunity for his wife to pursue a PhD in history, giving Naomi Collins the tools to pursue a career in her own right.
So I've remained grateful all of these years, and we've tried to give back to IU what we can because it was so special at the time to get that opportunity.
Throughout the 70s and 80s, Jim found himself, as he seems to do over and over again, at the center of so much history, from the Middle East to Latin America and Africa.
What distinguishes good policy from policy that is not adequately informed is knowledge of place. And for his entire career, Ambassador Collins has understood the importance of deep knowledge of a society and culture, its languages, its history, its politics, to forming good policy.
We were basically in charge of setting up relations with the Russian Federation, the new Russia. Russia was also a new state. It had borders it had never had before. It had new issues it had never dealt with before. What it amounted to was that I was the senior policy officer geographically for all of the former Soviet space except the 3 Baltic states.
In 1997, Jim was tapped as the U.S. ambassador to the Russian Federation, bringing years of experience, knowledge of the region, and his deft diplomacy to the role.
It's a heady experience. I won't deny it, to be ambassador at a post like Moscow, which at that time probably was the premier embassy, was really quite something. We had an aid budget of several hundred million that was engaged in everything from assistance to public health to economic reform to governance practice to setting up the stock market.
After years of service at the highest level, he found his way back to IU, serving on the Dean's Advisory Council for the Hamilton Luger School of Global and International Studies.
Indiana is also something of a home for us. We were married in Beck Chapel. We started our lives together at Indiana.
And in his role on the Advisory Council, he's creating opportunities and setting an example for a whole new class of IU graduates.
What's really exciting for me to see is that he can have an influence on the next generation of people involved in international affairs, in foreign policy, and hopefully ones who would want to serve in the U.S. government.
Дорогие друзья и коллеги Индианского университета, Я хочу просто вам сказать, что мы разделяем уникальный опыт Индианского университета и те условия, которые они дали нам для успеха. И я надеюсь, что вы, как мы, будем поддерживать Индианский университет в будущем.